and she will tell you a bit more about her background before she starts the presentation.
Oh, will I?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I've got a master's degree in atmospheric science from Macquarie University in Sydney in Australia, and then I've done my master's at Gothenburg University, also in climate and atmospheric science. But I've always had a biology component in my degree, and I've been interested in how climate change and the biosphere interact. So that's kind of what I work with now. I'm a PhD student just finishing my first year today, so I'll tell you what I've done so far. Here is the outline of my talk today, which I've chosen to call Evolution in Adaptation to Present-Day Climate Change. This is what most of my talk will be about, but I'll also introduce you to my study organisms, which are lizards, and I'll tell you about my most recent study. So I'll start with an introduction to the topic. I'll tell you how animals and plants can adjust to climate change and how evolutionary processes can be incorporated into predictive models. I'll give you some information about my PhD project, and then I'll tell you about my latest study. Climate is one of the main determinants of where different species of animals and plants live and where they don't live. A place where you find a species doesn't only have the right temperature, but it's got the right combination of climatic variables that that particular species requires. So the right combination of temperature, precipitation, wind speed, humidity, and so on. This means that as the climate changes, species are going to face new conditions, and maybe conditions that are not suitable for them. So an important question is, what happens then? Well, species can either adjust to the new environment, or they will eventually go to extinction. There are three main ways in which species can adjust to changes in their environment. They can either disperse to more suitable habitats. They can adjust by means of something called phenotypic plasticity, which is when an individual adjusts its phenotype, so its physiology and behavior, to suit the new environment. This process operates within generations, so it's a fast process that allows organisms to track rapid fluctuations in their environment. And then there's evolution, which refers to adaptation between generations. So it's generally a slower process that allows populations to persist under sustained environmental change. These first 2 points have been quite well studied and are already incorporated into models projecting future responses of species to climate change. And these models form the basis and will form the basis for most of management and conservation decisions under climate change. And if you look at IPCC's latest reports under the future of species and biodiversity, under climate change, these are the kinds of models that they base their predictions on. The third point, evolution, has not yet received much attention, but incorporating this process into predictive models will be crucial for understanding the responses of many organisms to climate change under or over both short and longer timescales. To incorporate evolutionary processes into predictive models, we need estimates of evolutionary rates for key fitness traits that are limited by climatic variables. A fitness trait is a trait that is linked to survival and reproduction. And a fitness trait that is limited by climate could be, for example, thermal tolerances or preferences, as is exemplified in the graph on the left-hand side, or thermal dependence of different developmental stages, such as egg or larval development, which you can see an example of in the right-hand slide. Estimates of evolutionary rates for predictive models should be obtained from long-term data sets collected in the field. But the problem is that for most animal groups, this type of data is not available. Birds are an exception. There's quite a lot of long-term field data out there for birds due to passionate ornithologists. But just knowing how birds are going to respond to climate change are not going to help us much in management decisions. I work with lizards, which is a group of animals that has been predicted a global-wide extinction risk due to climate change. I am lucky to have access to two long-term data sets on two wild lizard populations, one high-latitude population of sand lizards in Sweden, and a high-altitude population of snow skinks in Tasmania in Australia. One of the aims for my PhD is to identify key fitness traits in these lizards that are limited by climate, to estimate evolutionary rates in these traits, and then to incorporate these into predictive models. Now I'll tell you a little bit about my most recent study. I'm going to say that this is only a small part of my PhD, but I still wanted to share some interesting results with you. So in egg-laying lizards, which both populations that I'm working with are, the timing of egg-laying has been shown in the lab to have a major influence on offspring survival and future reproduction, which means that this trait also has a large influence on the long-term persistence of a population. The main determinant of egg-laying dates has been shown to be temperature. And I was therefore interested in how warmer spring temperatures, as expected with climate change, are likely to affect the timing of egg laying in these lizards, and hence also the survival of their offspring. To investigate this, I applied a mixed random regression model to analyze the effect of interannual variation in spring temperature. I used this as a proxy for climate to look at both how plastic females are in their laying date today, that is, how much are they currently able to adjust their laying dates in response to variation in spring temperature, and also whether there is an evolutionary potential in this trait. The analysis showed that females do adjust their timing of laying in response to variation in spring temperature, such that they lay their eggs earlier in warmer years, yielding more fit offspring than in colder years when eggs are laid later. Here in this graph, you've got egg-laying dates in days since January 1st in each year on the y-axis, and cumulated mean temperature over the reproductive period, which is April and May, on the x-axis. And you can see that the number of days until laying decrease with an increase in cumulated temperature. The analysis also showed that there is an evolutionary potential in this trait, which is illustrated in this graph by significant variation among females in when they lay their eggs. So combined, these findings suggest that climate warming is likely to have positive effects on an important component of fitness in this population over both short and longer timescales. This is for the Swedish population, and I'm doing the same type of analysis for the Australian population at the moment. I'm only giving a short talk, so I've already come to the final part where I'll give you some concluding remarks. As I mentioned earlier, lizards have been predicted a global-wide extinction risk due to climate change. These predictions are based on models that don't take evolutionary potential into account. So although my findings only concern one trait, they still illustrate that we have to be cautious when predicting extinction risks of different species and populations, as there may be large spatial variability. And they also show that it's important to take evolutionary potential into account when predicting future responses of species to climate change. I'm only at the beginning of my PhD, so I haven't had time to explore this data very much yet, but hopefully I'll be able to get as much possible out of these two rare data sets in order to provide information about another group of animals than just birds. And lizards are ectotherms, which is cold-blooded animals, And this group actually makes up more than 90% of all animals on Earth, including other reptiles, amphibians, and insects. So maybe some of my findings can help us generalize and give insights into species and populations within this large group for which there is no data available today. And maybe also help us guide some management and conservation decisions. Thank you very much for listening.
Gabriella, you have been very efficient in saving some time.
Yes.
A bit more of time, but so then now we have a lot of time for questions. Yes, please. One question from Finland and one from Vancouver.
Thank you, Gabriella, for a very interesting tool to follow up the climate change. And how high up to north the sand lizards are now in Sweden? Are they in Stockholm level or even in Gävle?
They're not up. So this is, Gothenburg is quite far south, but they're going up to, there's one more northern population that is further north.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, where are they? Sorry. But the interesting thing is that these, I mean, there was ice during the last glacial period, there was ice in this region. So these species have all come after that. So they have actually already been through climate change and have invaded from the south. Yeah.
Okay.
So Gabrielle, I just, sorry I came late to your
That's okay.
presentation, but you're such a good communicator. I got a takeaway, which is the days, there's going to be more the bird populations in the world are going to go up if laying eggs hatches sooner. So bird populations go up unless they die faster, right? And we should eat more chicken. So my question to you is that are there any concerns from your standpoint if egg production, egg hatching decreases in a fairly significant way, are bird populations in the world going to go up?
Well, I don't work with birds. I work with reptiles.
Oh, right, okay.
But I mean, for birds also, there's, like I said, there's large spatial variability. So you really have to be, I mean, I think what we all do when we work with predictive models, so everyone, it doesn't matter what field you're in, you have to simplify your parameters, but you shouldn't simplify them. I mean, you have to see, you have to look for spatial differences and for the underlying and main reasons for those differences. Because if you just project the same type of conditions for the whole world, we're going to waste money.
Are there going to be specific regions or countries
Yeah.
or ecosystems
Yeah.
where bird populations are going to go up?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it depends also on how large is the population from the beginning, for example, what's the generation rates, and things like that.
Any other questions? I guess iguanas are also, iguanas belong to the lizard family, don't they? Yeah. So I know there was a lady who lived in New York and had iguana as a home, pet at home. She had iguana and cat. So one day there was a guy, she lived on the 5th floor, and there was somebody mowing grass in the ground floor, so iguana was very much excited and wanted to see what's going on, and she fell down from the 5th floor. Survived, but the cat, who is a good friend of iguana, jumped behind her. But this kind of events don't count in your research.
No.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.